Thank you very much, Robin, and good evening, everyone, distinguished guests, ambassadors for peace, friends and colleagues. It's very good to see you. So my short talk tonight is called Remembering Father Moon. Remembering Father Moon. I actually clearly remember the moment that I heard the news of Father Moon's passing. I was running a program in Beckenham Town Hall, Beckenham in South London. It was to celebrate the 84th birthday of one ambassador for peace, Dr. Joy Philippou, most remarkable person who received an MBE for her charity fundraising work and was a very active person. One colleague from across the very crowded room made just the sign of a tear falling from her eye, and I knew what it meant. But I couldn't tell Dr. Philippou until after the event. I was the kind of MC for this program. It would have spoiled her entire evening completely. She was a woman with an enormous number of connections. So we had 200 or 300 people there enjoying a variety of, what can I call it, homegrown entertainment, maybe is a good word. And she, as a Catholic, also kind of Baha'i, and a teacher of both Buddhist and Hindu meditation, she'd been searching all her life, she said, for a living Messiah, and found such a person in Father Moon, so became very dedicated and a great spokesperson. Sun Myung Moon was an extraordinary person. A very great mind, certainly, a visionary, a person of very deep heart and love for humanity, and very much a man of prayer, as well as a man of action. We might wonder why his character and contribution has not been more widely recognized. It's, after all, 12 years since his passing, and he lived a very full life, although I don't doubt at all that eventually he will be recognized for who he was. But still, it's a real question. The reason has to be, I think, because of the area that he felt called to as the one kind of primary area in his life, the one most essential for fulfilling the commission that he received from the time of his encounter with Jesus when he was just 15 years old. Again, that was beautifully referenced in the slideshow that we just watched. And that area I'm talking about is, of course, religion. And his was the role primarily of a spiritual leader and a religious teacher, especially one bringing new ideas and insights. So this picture here kind of sums up that central part of his life and mission to me, always meeting with people, young and old, any kind of person, always sharing the word of God, always eager to talk. And apparently, although I don't understand the Korean even now, as a Korean, he would talk very fast. But he would say, well, I have so many things to say, right? I need to get it out, right? So that was Father Moon. All of his life, we can say he faced opposition and persecution. Where some of that comes from, I think, is very obvious in its pernicious nature. Through his ideological and philosophical critique of communism, which was widely taught and disseminated, he made many enemies. And they sought to spread lies and false rumors, and many of these tragically persist to this day. Also, this kind of opposition came from the religious world itself. And that's a not such pleasant side of the religious world, actually. And sad to say, even from Christian leaders in particular, he was branded a heretic. But, history teaches us that there's a certain pattern there. It's not a particularly pleasant pattern, but it's one where people cry, burn the heretic. And then they end up adopting the heresy, because actually what the person was saying was very sensible. And really it was just the fact that someone was saying something different which got under people's skin, and something new. But in fact, they end up adapting to those very words, which were in a way ahead of their time. And I think part of Father Moon's difficulty was he was ahead of his time, his ideas, his thinking. I think we're just kind of catching up now, and have quite a lot of catching up to do still. Even those who, we count ourselves very much part of his following. Actually, I think most of us who knew him well never expected that he would pass as soon as he did. But of course, he was 92, and that's normally considered a good age, isn't it, right? We'd be very happy to make it to that age. It's well beyond the average lifespan. But one reason why I think we imagined he would continue even longer was that we had heard he was making conditions. And I'll explain what that is. It's a very unificationist term, right? He was making conditions to live beyond 100. And I suppose naive faith on the part of people such as myself assumed that would be the course that his life would take. So, as I say, this idea of making conditions is very much unificationist language, and it arises from his teaching. It implies really that through some form of self-discipline and application, you make effort and you make sacrifice to a good end in order to achieve a goal. So it's purposefully paying a price and prayerfully paying that price. So when we consider that, we can say his whole life was one of making conditions. So many stories abound. I'll just share a couple of them that meant a lot to me. We've just had the Olympics, right, in Paris. Were you watching that?
Yeah.
Fantastic, isn't it, right? Back in 1988, that was when the Olympics took place in Seoul, Korea, which is, of course, Father Moon's home nation. So he wanted to be there, and in the very midst of that, to welcome the world to Korea. That was their kind of slogan for the Games. This picture is of the Korean Olympic Stadium that was built for the 88 Olympics. But here it's being used for a unificationist wedding. Can you believe? This is a blessing ceremony from August 1992, 30,000 couples, plus many more joining by satellite from other locations in the world. But, we like to think that maybe this was the real reason the Olympic Stadium was built, right? So at the time of the Olympics, Father Moon brought representatives from all around the world to help contact embassies and the chef de mission of the various Olympic teams. He wanted to offer gifts and genuine hospitality to everybody of the whole massive Olympic team that was visiting the homeland of Korea. And I was amongst the task force that was summoned to go to Korea to help with these things. I think I was kept quite busy. I just saw one piece of the Olympics. that was all. But, we were doing very worthwhile work, I'm sure. So on our arrival, when we got there, we were invited to Father Moon's home, where we had heard he was watching television. He was watching the Olympic Games on television. But I tell you, he wasn't simply watching television. We were surprised to see that he was sat in the middle of quite a big a carpeted living room, we can say, and with 3 large projection screens. This is 1988, so these are kind of, not the style of flat screen that we have today. And he had 3 remote controls, flicking between the channels and dodging the adverts and the Korean dramas, what those are like, and trying to catch as much of the sports coverage as possible from the different channels. They would be televising different parts and different buildings, and this was quite an operation. He said his goal, the kind of condition that he was making, his goal was to watch more of the Olympics than any other person. And this was the condition he was making. But the shocking thing was that because of his determination to do this, his face was swollen. And all around his eyes, it was puffy, because he was watching from early morning to late night and 3 televisions. This gets very tiring. So clearly, he wasn't doing this for personal enjoyment or entertainment. He was saying, genuinely, I want to do this more than any other person to show my love, my commitment, my kind of wanting to really harness this for the power of goodness to launch the nation of Korea more onto the world stage than it had been up to then. And I think we've seen that happen since. So maybe some of that effort contributed to Korea's success. And while he was watching, he would get inspirations. At one point, he told his assistant to get made a suit of clothes for every participant from those foreign countries. Now, that's not a small thing, right? In the end, I think, it couldn't be done in time, but they had to send bolts of beautiful material back to the various countries where the teams were coming from and could make them suits.
I think the Soviets got theirs.
The Soviets got theirs. This was significant because they were involved in the games after a large break, right? So he felt really it was a way to heal some of the rifts between the communist and democratic world. So, so this is what he was kind of thinking, suddenly thinking, we have to do this for these people. And then he would organize it and try and make it happen. Well, later around, must have been 1993, I was a student at that time at the Unification Theological Seminary, which also Father Moon founded, in upstate New York, and we were living quite close to where Father and Mother Moon were at that time. And at that same time, he was encouraging his wife to do a tour giving public speeches. And he thought it better for her to go without him. And this was surely some kind of advanced preparation, I think, for what she's doing now to further their work. But of course, still he wanted to support her and find a way to support her. So he wanted to make some condition, right? For that, he made a determination that for the period that she was away giving public speeches, he would go fishing in the Hudson River in upstate New York for striped bass. And he'd go every day, early morning. Well, here's a picture of a striped bass. They're very elegant fish, actually. Right? And it happened to be the time of year when these particular fish swim up the Hudson River. Right? Now, I had a chance to go on a second boat on one of those mornings. Our 2 boats fished nearby each other in the same part of the river. Father Moon determined that he would catch 12 of these fish himself every morning and would not return home until he had done that. And that would support his wife in her tour of various cities giving public speeches. Wow. How many women have a husband who
Not many.
support them that way, right? So, Um, Now, that in itself is already a difficult challenge, right? Because if you've ever fished, you know that no matter how good you are, sometimes you catch fish, right? And sometimes you don't, right? You can come home having not caught a single fish, and you seem to have done everything right. But there was an added difficulty. The law on the Hudson River, it placed some restriction on fishermen. There was a rule: one person, one fish per day. But he wanted to catch 12. And the river was patrolled by river police. They have boats going up and down, right? And checking, how much you're catching, this kind of thing. So what could he do? Well, he had the perfect solution. On his boat, he took 11 Japanese sisters, ladies from our church community, right? Who didn't fish. None of them would fish, but they were one person, and, they could get one fish for that day, right? So he was doing all the fishing, although they probably helped with baiting some of the hooks, which was not such a pleasant job. And he set up 6 rods at the end of his boat, and at 5 a.m. that morning set off into the middle of the river to begin fishing. So it looks something like this. And there he was, in silence, working away, doing this job, absolutely determined. And as I said, I was in the second identical boat, but I was with 11 other colleagues, so 12 of us. Each of us had a rod, and each of us were trying to catch one fish each. By 8 in the morning, Father Moon had caught more than 12 striped bass. Himself, right? So his boat had to come over to our boat and offload 3 or 4 fish. And then he went home to continue his day's business. As for us, amongst the 12 of us, which included actually some experienced fishermen, none of us caught a fish. None of us caught a fish that was big enough to keep. If it was under 6 inches, you had to throw it back or something. And we stayed out as the sun rose and grew hotter and hotter, and until midday, and then we had to abandon our efforts and return home with red faces, physically and metaphorically. That was the end of our fishing trip. For me, the whole experience had some kind of biblical ring to it, to be very honest. It provided many lessons. For me, I realized that we really have to train and hone our determination. And we have to fully focus on achieving a goal if we want to achieve that goal. There's no other way. And so looking back, I could say I failed on many counts. But then, what was my goal? My goal was just to go fishing at least once with Father. And, I accomplished that. So, I managed that goal. So it's a kind of case of you get what you ask for, right? So interesting. I hope and pray that the world soon discovers the real Sun Myung Moon. That people will drop those very lazy, prejudiced views that get easily passed around. That the Christian world in particular ends the hunt for heresies in favor of seeing a bigger picture and being open to God's work in a new age. I think such religious views have an understandable concern to protect and maintain a set of beliefs, and that can work for a time. We can say it's even necessary for a certain time, but there's always a corresponding danger that overprotection of one's beliefs can end up stopping the progress and the work of the living God. Jesus himself faced such problems. If we examine the Gospels, we see it very plainly during his lifetime. And it's a prime example there that we cannot and should not ignore. If you ask, what is the crime of the new religious movement that Reverend Moon founded that has, in some areas, created such a hostile reaction, you have to conclude that there are actually two. The first is, it's new, and that's always historically been a problem. And the second is, it's successful. And that gets people's backs riled, right? And largely when people are more interested in power, to be honest, than doing God's work. So, however, I say the world needs Father Moon's teaching, and it needs people inspired and motivated by that teaching, and it needs those people to do more for the world. Such people are ambassadors for peace. Father Moon said this: "It's not that I make an effort to love God, but that I cannot help loving him. I have been that way. I pray for things 1,000 years from now." So I encourage you all to continue this great work, and I want to thank you all for listening to my few words tonight. May God bless you, your families, and this nation. Thank you.